Thanks, Rani, for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. Again, my name is Anaga Hanumante, and thanks for joining our research briefing on the future of protein, where we're going to take a quick look at some of the major trends transforming the alternative protein sector in 2018 and beyond. Before we start, let me take you through a quick overview of what we'll be covering in today's presentation. First, we'll take a look at what is driving innovation across the protein sector today. We'll then highlight trends across alternative proteins, including lab-grown and plant-based meats and fish-free substitutes. We'll then talk about some final forward-looking trends and industries impacted by alternative proteins. So let's jump right in. It's no secret that alternative proteins have been gaining traction across both the private and public sectors. And we know that protein is a staple of human dietary needs. In fact, some estimates show that 30% of global human calorie consumption comes from meat products, including chicken, pork, and beef. But the meat value chain, as it exists today, is incredibly complex and has great opportunity to be simplified. Not to mention, the nuances of meat production differ depending on the specific type of meat in question. But the meat industry as a whole has seen massive consolidation, as companies like Hormel and JBS have grown bigger through the acquisition of new meat brands and products. And despite high-profile deals, the industrial meat sector faces a great deal of challenges in the form of interrelated business, ethical, and environmental concerns. But many individuals and groups have been challenging the notion that meat needs to be derived from animals, and are using new technologies to produce animal-free meat. So why now? What's causing this alternative protein revolution? Here we take a look at a few macro reasons influencing the shift towards a more meatless future. First off, urbanization, population growth, and a rising middle class are leading to greater meat consumption, and meatless companies are looking to fill this gap. Alternative protein sources can also reduce negative environmental impact. We know that livestock is a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, and reducing livestock could free up global cropland, decrease soil erosion, and relieve pressure on the global water supply. This is also coinciding with a time when consumers are seeking healthier and more sustainable food alternatives. Rising obesity rates across the globe, coupled with consumer interest in healthier food alternatives, are also driving this demand for meatless proteins. And finally, advances in agricultural technology and synthetic biology are enabling high-tech meatless products. Cellular agriculture and molecular engineering are fueling tech-enabled meat substitutes that are better emulating the flavors and textures of real meat. Now that we've established why alternative proteins are thriving, we'll dive into a few trends across the space. Startups using technology to engineer meat in labs or manufacture it from plant-based products are rising in popularity. Beyond plant-based and lab-grown meats and seafood, which we'll focus on in today's presentation, there are a variety of startups incorporating different plant-based proteins, such as mushroom, algae, and chickpeas, as you can see on the market map here. Other categories include drinkable meals. I'm sure most of you have heard of Soylent, as well as dairy substitutes with startups such as Ripple producing pea protein-based milk, and even insect-based proteins. These startups are not only offering new products, but they also have the potential to upend all parts of the meat production process. Animal-free meats has taken the form of both plant-based and lab-grown meats, with companies such as Impossible Foods, Beyond Meat, and Memphis Meats being a few notable players in the space. We even see traditional meat players getting involved. International food conglomerate Cargill is ramping up on innovation efforts across the alternative meat sector, from investing in lab-cultured meat startup Memphis Meats, as well as launching a joint venture with Puris, which is North America's largest pea protein producer. But Cargill is obviously still developing its meat capabilities with investments in an AI for livestock startup Canthus, as well as investing in frontier technologies for agricultural monitoring, and even exploring blockchain to support meat transparency efforts. So this shows that Cargill likely envisions a future where traditional and alternative meat sources can coexist. Tyson's venture arm, similarly, which was launched in 2016, has also ramped up its activity with investments in both plant-based and lab-grown meat startups. Looking at more emerging technologies, venture capital firms and accelerators could give us a glimpse of what's down the line for these high-tech foods. Biotech accelerator IndieBio and early-stage VC fund New Crop Capital have placed many bets in animal-free foods. And this is showing that it's a variety of players who have a stake in the alternative protein sector beyond just startups and larger corporations. We're seeing alternative proteins target fish and the seafood supply chain, which has huge opportunities for improvement, in the same way that they've already been targeting meat. Sustainability has also been in focus for fish-based meals, with consumers increasingly seeking transparency on where their seafood is coming from, and we've seen this trend reflected in the rise of frozen seafood meals. And now, fish-free seafood substitutes could help meet this consumer demand for transparency down the line for both plant-based and lab-grown seafood products. Finless Foods, for example, is working on lab-grown bluefin tuna, while Good Catch, which recently raised a $5.5 million round, is developing lab-grown salmon. So we're seeing ultimately that seafood companies are following a similar trajectory to meatless alternatives. Now we'll take a look at some other forward-looking trends across the alternative protein sector. Firstly, regulation will play a bigger role in the meat production or the meat industry moving forward, especially when it comes to defining clean meat, which is the phrase for cultured or lab-grown meat products. We've seen regulatory proposals on both the state and national level, as seen here, and we expect these regulations to force both meat giants and alternative protein startups to continue rethinking their approach to developing meatless products, especially when it comes to lab-grown foods. And we've seen the Dairy Pride Act conduct similar measures to protect traditional dairy and milk products from plant-based alternatives that imitate dairy. So really, these regulations are reflective of a broader battle between big food versus plant-based dairy and meat alternatives. Beyond pending regulatory battles, lab-grown meat companies face a major challenge in finding a substitute for animal serums, which are crucial to develop if lab-based meat will ultimately make it to market. The need for animal serums, specifically fetal bovine serum, which is one of the most popular animal serums and is extracted from cow fetuses, makes lab-grown meats costly and ultimately is the reason why these high-tech meat alternatives are still priced as luxury goods. However, startups such as Finless Foods and others as seen here are looking to eliminate FBS from the meatless equation in order to cut costs and address ethical concerns. These companies are exploring microbial fermentation, algal or fungal extracts, and even DNA-based technologies to produce a viable substitute. On that note, animal feed companies such as Calista and String Bio are engineering meat-like products from methane that are being used for animal feed and could also potentially become fit for human consumption in the future. Methane-based proteins could eventually improve the environmental impact of meat production and eventually fuel the alternative protein segment by creating another food source for developing economies in Africa and Asia. Though startups are still figuring out how to bring lab-grown meat to market, countries are placing bets on a future of meatless products. Earlier in September, China announced a $300 million deal to import lab-grown meat from 3 Israel-based companies as part of a broader plan to decrease the country's meat consumption by 50%. Such cross-country collaboration indicates that we can expect to see more experimentation across the globe on alternative protein sources. And with China being one of the largest global consumers of meat and pork in particular, what the country does will be meaningful for the industry at large. Alternative meat will also hit other Asian markets, as we can see with Impossible Foods' recent funding, and Asia being the company's first international market. This could ultimately help meet global demand for food production and clean meat. The company also just announced that it will be partnering with American fast food chain White Castle to introduce its Impossible sliders. So we're seeing that alternative meat companies are looking to bring their products to a wider audience instead of limiting them to higher-priced fast casual restaurants as they've previously been. And beyond human food, Lab-grown or plant-based foods could upend the pet food market. Wild Earth and Bond Pet Foods are two startups beginning to design lab-grown and plant-based pet foods. And ultimately, if consumers are seeking more sustainable, better-for-you proteins for themselves, it's natural that they'd eventually want similar options for their pets. Outside of food technologies, animal-free leather is encouraging sustainable fashion through companies such as Anna Sanam on the left, that's developed plant-based leather from pineapple, and Modern Meadow on the right, that's producing lab-grown leather through collagen. Down the line, we could see this potentially have a larger impact on the fashion industry, where sustainability is a huge issue. And on the note of these other industries, including fashion and pet food, companies across these industries are working on similar technologies. So as they scale up, this could benefit all players in the space. So what happens in fashion or animal-free leather could have a direct technology impact on meat startups. So we imagine that companies across these different industries will be watching each other closely. And we've seen this across multiple industries, but big tech has been pushing into the ag tech space. So for example, Jeff Bezos and SoftBank have invested in vertical farming startup Plenty, while Alibaba recently began partnering with farming companies to develop AI-based applications for pig husbandry. Ultimately, we'll see big tech become more aggressive across ag tech and rely more specifically on farming data, with clean meat potentially becoming a focus area down the line. And beyond big tech, we could even see alternative proteins impact the insurance industry. Lab-grown or plant-based meats could be integrated into health focus or diet-specific meal kits, which could then lead to insurance companies paying for health-tailored meals as part of medical or corporate wellness programs. This wouldn't necessarily target vegetarians or meat eaters, but rather focus on a broader consumer demographic that is tackling health concerns or pursuing health-tailored diets. And finally, on that note, alternative proteins will affect the consumer mindset towards their diets and individual health. Dietary labels such as vegetarian, vegan, and pescatarian won't be enough, and companies' marketing and advertising capabilities will have to adapt to address a much more diverse array of dietary preferences that consumers will adopt in the future, thanks to the advent of alternative proteins. And that concludes our webinar. Thanks to everyone for listening in, and we'll go ahead and open it up for some questions. Taking a look at a couple of questions coming in. One question here, after beef and salmon, what's the next lab-grown meat category? So we've seen chicken and tuna substitutes gain traction, and these technologies will continue to expand across other untouched meat and seafood categories. For example, things like pork or duck, or on the seafood side, eel. For example, Memphis Meats originally debuted a cell-cultured duck a couple of years ago, while another company, Ocean Hunger Foods, is working on eggplant-based eel, I believe. So once the technology develops and scales, we could virtually see, or we could see lab-grown foods hit every product category. See, another question, what are the biggest marketing challenges for lab-grown startups, and what strategies help make people feel more comfortable eating it? So I think the most obvious marketing challenge is really getting rid of the ick or the grossness factor of eating lab-grown meat. There definitely is a large psychological barrier for a lot of consumers towards eating lab-grown foods. And these consumers just may prefer, be more comfortable with traditional meat products. And I think from the marketing standpoint, marketing towards the environmental benefits of lab-grown meats could be a useful tactic. So really emphasizing how these products are offering sustainable meat alternatives or creating better seafood supply chains. This tactic could be enticing to environmentally conscious consumers. Packaging itself could also ultimately be very important for lab-grown meat or seafood startups. So we could see lab-grown meat providers partner with packaging companies. Lumi is one company that comes to mind here. This could ultimately help lab-grown meat companies make their products look more enticing for consumers, or on the other end of the spectrum, just de-emphasize the fact that the product is even lab-grown. And one other unique strategy that we've seen has come from a Tokyo-based company, Integraculture, and nonprofit Shojin Meat Project as well, which is using open source technologies to make people more comfortable with eating meat by giving consumers the at-home technologies to experiment with growing cultured animal cells at home and turning them into their lab-grown meats effectively. So that particular concept might seem a bit out there, but this bottoms-up crowdsourced type model could give consumers the transparency they're seeking when it comes to knowing exactly where their food is coming from, and it could make people more comfortable with incorporating lab-grown foods into their diets. I think we have time for one more question. Let's see. Could lab-grown technologies save endangered species? It definitely could. Definitely researchers have, mentioned this topic before. We could see cells from certain endangered species that could be used to produce rare meats, which could then cause less of a need for the global trade of meat from endangered animals. We haven't seen any major initiatives here yet, as these technologies are still developing and moving to market, but this is something that could definitely play a bigger role in saving endangered species in the future. Okay, I think that's all the time we have for questions. Thanks everyone again for listening. Please feel free to reach out with any questions. Would love to continue the conversation, and have a great day. Thanks.